This tank looks healthy. The water is clear, the fish are active, the filter is running, and right now, the water is slowly poisoning every fish inside it. Not from disease, not from a dirty tank, from something invisible. Something that is happening in every single aquarium on Earth, and something that most fish owners have never actually had explained to them properly. Here's the most common story in the hobby. Someone buys a tank, sets it up, fills it with water, adds the dechlorinator, gets the filter running, waits a day for the water to settle, buys fish. Everything looks great for about a week. Then fish start dying, one by one, or all at once. The water still looks clear, the filter is still running. There is no obvious reason. They go back to the pet store. The employee says, "Did you cycle your tank?" And the new fish keeper has no idea what that means. This scenario plays out millions of times every year, across every country, in every type of tank, with every species of fish. And it is almost entirely preventable. Today, I am going to show you exactly what the nitrogen cycle is. Not in the way a biology textbook explains it, in the way that actually makes sense when you are standing in front of your tank, trying to understand why your fish keep dying. I am going to show you what is happening invisibly in your water right now, where it can go wrong, how to know when it is going wrong before your fish show symptoms, and the one thing that speeds up the entire process that almost no beginner guide mentions. I'm saving that for the end, because it changes the timeline from weeks to days. Before we start, subscribe right now if you want aquarium content built on real biology and real data. This is the video that should come before anyone buys their first fish. Let's get into it. Before we go into the cycle itself, one sentence that makes everything else make sense. Your aquarium is not a container of water with fish in it. It is a living, biological system. And like every biological system, it produces waste that has to go somewhere. In nature, rivers and lakes process that waste across thousands of gallons of water, thousands of square feet of surface area, and billions of microorganisms. In your tank, that entire process has to happen in 10 gallons, or 20, or 50. That compression, taking what nature does across miles and fitting it into a glass box, is what the nitrogen cycle is managing. And when it fails, even briefly, your fish pay the price. Chapter 1. The Invisible Poison. What ammonia actually is. Every fish in your tank is producing ammonia right now, continuously, through their gills, through their waste, through the decomposition of any uneaten food on your substrate. Ammonia, NH3, is the first product of biological waste breakdown, and it is toxic to fish at concentrations so low they are measured in parts per million. To give you a reference point, a concentration of just 0.5 parts per million of ammonia in your tank water is enough to cause gill damage in most tropical fish. That is not a massive spike. That is half a drop in an Olympic swimming pool. At 2 parts per million, gill tissue begins to break down. Fish breathe harder. They hover near the surface where oxygen is highest. They lose color. Their immune system begins to shut down. At 3 to 5 parts per million, organ failure begins. Fish die. And here is the part that makes this genuinely frightening for new fish owners. Your water can look completely clear at 2 parts per million ammonia. There is no visible warning sign, no color change in the water, no smell, until concentrations are extremely high. The only way to know your ammonia is rising before your fish show symptoms is to test the water. But here is what most beginners do not realize about ammonia testing. A standard ammonia test kit measures total ammonia, which includes two different forms of the compound. Free ammonia, NH3, is the toxic form. It damages tissue and kills fish. Ammonium, NH4+, is the ionized form. It is largely harmless to fish in normal concentrations. Which form dominates in your tank depends on pH and temperature. At pH above 7.0, more of your total ammonia exists as free NH3, the toxic form. At pH below 7.0, more exists as ammonium, the harmless form. This is why a tank reading 1 part per million total ammonia at pH 8.0 is a crisis, and a tank reading 1 part per million total ammonia at pH 6.5 may be perfectly fine. Your test kit gives you total ammonia. Your pH tells you how dangerous it actually is. This is one of the most important pieces of information in the hobby, and it almost never appears on the label of a beginner test kit. Chapter 2: The bacteria that save everything. Now, here is the good news. Nature has a solution to ammonia, and it has had that solution for billions of years. Two families of bacteria, primarily Nitrosomonas and Nitrospira species, have evolved specifically to consume ammonia as an energy source. Nitrosomonas consume ammonia and convert it to nitrite, NO2-. Nitrospira then consume that nitrite and convert it to nitrate, NO3-. Nitrate is the end product. It is relatively harmless at low concentrations, and it is removed from your system through water changes, or consumed by plants if you have a planted tank. This two-step biological process is the nitrogen cycle. Ammonia goes in, bacteria convert it, nitrate comes out. You remove the nitrate. Simple in theory. The complication is that these bacteria do not appear in your tank instantly. They have to grow. They have to colonize. They have to reach a population large enough to process the ammonia your fish are producing faster than the ammonia can accumulate. And that process, that bacterial colonization, is what cycling a tank means. Before the bacteria are established, ammonia builds up. After Nitrosomonas establish, but before Nitrospira establish, nitrite builds up. Nitrite is actually more toxic per unit than ammonia in many fish species. It interferes directly with the blood's ability to carry oxygen. Your fish are essentially at the mercy of how quickly these bacterial colonies can grow. Which brings us to the timeline that breaks most beginners' hearts. Chapter 3: The timeline nobody warns you about. A conventional fish-in cycle, adding fish to a new tank and letting the bacteria establish around them, takes 4 to 8 weeks. 4 to 8 weeks, during which your fish are living in water with actively rising ammonia and nitrite levels, during which you need to test every 2 to 3 days, during which you may need to do partial water changes not to clean the tank, but to dilute the toxins enough to keep the fish alive long enough for the bacteria to establish. This is why so many beginners lose fish in the first month. Not because they did anything dramatically wrong, because nobody told them this process takes 4 to 8 weeks and that fish can die during it. Here is what the timeline actually looks like when you test regularly. Week 1 to 2. Ammonia rises. This is the bacterial food source building up. No nitrite yet. No nitrate yet. This is the most dangerous phase for fish. Week 2 to 3. Ammonia begins to drop as Nitrosomonas establish. Nitrite begins to rise as those bacteria produce their waste product. Ammonia dropping looks like progress, but nitrite rising is a new threat replacing the old one. Week 3 to 5. Nitrite peaks and begins to drop as Nitrospira establish and begin consuming it. This is the longest phase. Nitrite can stay elevated for weeks. Week 5 to 8. Both ammonia and nitrite drop to 0. Nitrate begins appearing. This is the signal that the cycle is complete. Your bacterial colony is established. Your tank can now process waste as fast as your fish produce it. The cycle is complete when you can add a measured amount of ammonia to your tank and see it drop to 0 within 24 hours, with nitrite also reading 0. That is the test. That is the benchmark. Everything before that point is a tank in progress. Chapter 4. Reading the signs before your fish show symptoms. Here are the behavioral signals that your water chemistry is failing before a single fish dies. Gasping at the surface. This is almost always an oxygen or nitrite crisis. Nitrite interferes with hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in fish blood. A fish in elevated nitrite is effectively suffocating, even in fully oxygenated water. They surface gasp because their blood cannot carry the oxygen that is right there in front of them. Red or pink streaking on fins and body. This is ammonia burn. The capillaries near the surface of the tissue are being damaged by ammonia exposure. It looks like inflammation because it is inflammation. On a pale or white fish, it is extremely visible. On a darker species, it can be easy to miss. Lethargy near the bottom. Not the relaxed resting of a healthy fish. A compressed, still posture with fins held close to the body. This is a stress response. The fish is conserving energy because its environment is costing it more to live in than usual. Loss of color. Fish in chronically elevated ammonia or nitrite consistently show color fading before any other visible symptom. This is the most common early warning sign and the most commonly attributed to other causes. Any one of these behaviors warrants an immediate water test. Not tomorrow, not after the next water change, right now. 4 chapters down. The invisible poison, the bacteria that process it, the timeline it takes, the signs it is failing. Before the most important part, subscribe right now if you haven't, because the next video in this series is the complete water testing guide. What to test, when to test, and how to read results correctly, so you never misinterpret your parameters again. That video, plus this one, is the foundation that makes every other aquarium decision make sense. Here is where most nitrogen cycle guides stop. Ammonia to nitrite, nitrite to nitrate. Wait 4 to 8 weeks. Done. And if that is all you take from this video, you are already ahead of most beginners. But there is a layer to this that almost no guide ever addresses. Because the nitrogen cycle is not just something that happens once when you set up a new tank. It is something that can crash, partially or completely, in an established tank, at any point, without warning. And the cause is almost always something the fish keeper did with the best intentions. Chapter 5. How to crash a cycle tank. The mistakes nobody warns you about. Your bacterial colony lives on surfaces. Every porous surface inside your filter, every ceramic ring, every piece of sponge media, the walls of your tank, your substrate, your decorations. This colony is established. It is processing your fish's waste every minute of every day. And it is completely invisible to you. Which means every time you clean something in your tank, you are potentially removing a portion of it. Mistake 1. Replacing your filter cartridge. We covered this in the filter video, but it bears repeating in this context because it is the most common single cause of mini-cycles in established tanks. When you pull out a colonized cartridge and replace it with a sterile new one, you remove a significant portion of the bacterial colony living on that media. Your remaining bacteria must repopulate. During the days or weeks that repopulation takes, ammonia and nitrite can rise. Slightly, invisibly, but measurably. The fix? Never replace filter media entirely. Rinse old media gently in old tank water. Add new media alongside old media to seed it. Retire old media gradually over weeks, not all at once. Mistake 2. Cleaning filter media under tap water. Tap water contains chlorine and chloramine. Both are added intentionally to kill bacteria. Rinsing your sponge filter under the tap feels thorough. It looks clean afterward. It has also just killed a significant portion of the colony living on it. The fix is simple and always the same. Rinse filter media in a bucket of old tank water that you have already removed during a water change. Never under the tap. Never. Mistake 3. Medicating the tank. This one breaks people's hearts, because they are trying to help their fish. Most aquarium medications, particularly antibiotics and medications for bacterial infections, are not selective. They do not kill only the disease organism. They kill bacteria broadly, including the beneficial bacteria in your filter. Medicating a sick fish in your display tank can crash your nitrogen cycle at the exact moment your fish is most vulnerable. The fix? Whenever possible, medicate in a quarantine tank separate from your display tank. Your display tank cycle stays intact. Your sick fish gets treatment. Both populations are protected. Mistake 4. Large water changes with cold or unchlorinated tap water. Adding a significant volume of cold water to a warm tank causes a temperature shock that stresses beneficial bacteria as well as fish. Adding unchlorinated water seems like it should be fine, but some municipal water supplies have pH or mineral content variations between seasons that can create a brief chemistry shock. Match your water change water to within 1 degree of tank temperature. Always dechlorinate, even if you have done it 100 times without visible problems. Chapter 6. The thing that speeds up the cycle nobody talks about. The one thing that genuinely accelerates the nitrogen cycle faster than any bottled product is something most beginners with access to an established tank already have available to them. Established biological media. If you have a friend with a healthy established tank, or if your local fish store runs tanks that have been running for months, a piece of used filter media from that system is a bacterial starter culture. A single established sponge filter placed into a new tank introduces billions of living, active nitrifying bacteria directly into the system. Those bacteria begin processing ammonia immediately. They do not need to grow from zero. They do not need to colonize. They are already there. In a tank with sufficient ammonia source and a piece of established media, the cycle can complete in 5 to 10 days instead of 4 to 8 weeks. This is the oldest, most reliable method of rapid cycling in the hobby. It requires no products. It costs nothing. And it is almost never mentioned in beginner guides because there's nothing to sell. Your local fish store almost certainly runs established sponge filters in their fish tanks as backup filtration. Many will give away or sell a used sponge filter for a few dollars. That sponge is worth more for cycling a new tank than any bottle of beneficial bacteria on any shelf. If you do not have access to established media, the second most effective method is to heavily plant the new tank from the start. Plants host bacterial colonies on their roots and surfaces. They consume ammonia and nitrite directly. A heavily planted new tank cycles faster than a bare tank because the biological surface area is significantly higher. Bottled bacteria products like Chem Stability or Fritz Turbo Start do provide some acceleration, but they work best in combination with established media or heavy planting. Alone, they extend the cycle by perhaps a week. Combined, they can be meaningful. Here's what the nitrogen cycle actually is, stripped of every technical term. Your fish produce poison. Bacteria eat that poison and produce a less dangerous version. Different bacteria eat that and produce something your plants can use. You remove what the plants do not consume. That chain, fish to bacteria to plants to water change, is the entire system. When it is working, your fish thrive. Your water stays clear, your parameters stay stable. You spend your time watching your tank instead of fighting it. When any link in that chain breaks, when the bacteria are disrupted, when the feeding load exceeds the bacteria's capacity, when the plants are removed and nothing replaces their role, the chain breaks. Ammonia rises, fish suffer. And the owner usually has no idea why, because the water still looks fine. You now know what is happening in that water. You know what ammonia and nitrite actually are and why they are dangerous. You know how long the cycle takes and what the stages look like. You know what breaks an established cycle without warning. And you know how to accelerate a new cycle without spending money on products that work marginally at best. The nitrogen cycle is not a technical concept for advanced hobbyists. It is the foundation of every tank at every level. And now you have it. Before you close this video, do one thing. Get a test kit if you do not have one. Not test strips, a liquid drop test kit. API Master test kit is the most widely available and reliable option for beginners. Test your ammonia and nitrite today. Not because something is probably wrong, because you now know enough to read what your water is actually telling you. If your ammonia is at 0 and your nitrite is at 0, your cycle is established and working. That is the baseline. Everything is measured against that. If either reading is above 0 in an established tank, you now know exactly where to look first. The complete water testing guide. What to test, when to test, and how to read every result correctly drops next. Subscribe right now so you do not miss it. And drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced a cycle crash without knowing what caused it? Because I think this comment section is about to become the most useful troubleshooting thread on this channel.